Welcome to the Center for Transformation Institute podcast. In this episode, we're exploring the life model concept of a human response to God's redemptive plan. We are going to cover three things. First, the human response to God's redemptive plan and what that actually is. Secondly, what happens when this is missing from our clients' lives or from our lives in terms of understanding. And thirdly, how to apply this concept in private practice and in the practice of working with clients and those that we are ministering to. So if you're new here, I am Monica with the CFT Institute, where we train therapists, counselors, and spiritual leaders in a framework approach that combines neuroscience with faith. Let's dive in. So what is a human response to God's redemptive plan? So in order to understand the big picture concept of that, we kind of need to think about what our worldview is. And if you have a biblical worldview, you're thinking about the fact that there is a God who created the universe. And as he has created that universe, there was an intentional plan that was beautiful and perfect, as is spoken about in Genesis. There was perfection until sin came in and the fall of man happened. So if that perfect world would have played itself out, attachment, relationships in marriage, in parenting, and throughout the generations would have been perfect. And there would have been high joy community where needs were met and connections were formed and community brought peace and joy. We all know that is not what's happening in our world, that sin has created such trauma. And it is the pain that is happening in each of our lives that leads us toward coping mechanisms and instead of relationship. And when we go toward those coping mechanisms instead of relationship, we create addictions in our lives that lead to the perpetuation of more and more trauma that is acted out on others. And that's the disintegration of the fabric of community and connection and attachment. So there isn't joyful connection. There is disintegration and pain. There is loneliness and fear. There is shame and all manner of difficulty. And that is really the world that we live in. And a life model talks about how we don't need to do anything to keep the cycle of trauma and addiction and pain continuing to go around and around and around. It propagates itself without any effort on our parts. So when we think about the idea of a human response to God's redemptive plan, it has to do with this idea that we as humans have an opportunity to partner with God in his plan to redeem our lives and our relationships in our communities. That makes me so excited. Dr. Wilder has been known to say that, salvation is God's gift to us, but maturity is our job. And really a redemptive plan is about saying yes to maturity growth, saying yes to a sanctification process where we become more like God in our character. When we turn to connection with him and others instead of addictions, when we choose to live from a lens of our true identity that has the character of Christ and the fruit of the Spirit exemplified, rather than living from our pain places because we go into hyperarousal or hypoarousal as a way of coping because we can't stay present with ourselves or others in difficulty. We just don't have the capacity. So if we micro focus in this episode on the idea of a human response to God's redemptive plan, we're saying, who wants in? Who wants to go into this place of agreeing with God and the redemption he wants to offer us? We may never be able to live perfectly in this world, right? And it's not that we will never be able to. The Garden of Eden has come and gone. The original design is no longer available, but there is redemption for the disintegrations. There is redemption for the pain, for the suffering. Suffering has purpose. And I mean, I have this strong sense. I oftentimes find myself thinking, yes, this is a difficult situation, but I know God will come through, and that builds my faith. Or this is an opportunity for me to grow, and that builds my joy and perseverance in hardship. This is why the scripture says, hey, be joyful in all circumstances. Or, hey, the testing of your faith is going to develop perseverance, and perseverance is going to develop character, and character is going to develop hope. Like, how can you have hope in difficulty? But that's what faith is. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. I can have hope in all circumstances. I can have hope because of the faithfulness of God. So this is our human response to God's redemptive plan. First of all, we have to understand the world is disintegrating. We do have much difficulty in this world. We have to accept the plight that we're in. And then we have to see that we are not hopeless in that plight. Hopeless despair, from a life model, from a neurological lens, says, I don't have the time and resources to fix the problem. And I love how my friend and colleague Ed Curry says, yes, we don't have the time and resources to fix the problem. But when we find ourselves in hopeless despair, that is where God comes in. That is where faith comes in. When we are in a place of our bottom, our personal bottom, our place of surrender, that is where hope in something bigger than us, hope in the supernatural comes in, joins with us. And that is how we can find a place of joy in the midst of difficulty, because we know that God is going to produce fruit from our difficult circumstances. So God has a plan to redeem us from our brokenness so that we can live our lives on this earth in more fullness, fully alive, fully connected, and fully living out His intended design for us. Every single one of us faces struggle. We are all going to have struggle. We're all going to have trouble. We're all going to have trauma. And this causes suffering, but we can suffer well. We can suffer well when we're connected to God in the difficulty. So this really can happen. And I think that's what's exciting. We say in Life Model that joy propagates itself faster than addiction, that true joy, neurologically, when we are glad to be with God and glad to be with others in the face of difficulty, that propagates itself faster than trauma and addiction. I was sitting with a client yesterday, and this client's had been struggling with the same issue for years and years and years and years. And as we looked at one another and we came to this next level of understanding about his brokenness before God to handle this issue, we found joy together and with God that He will do something good in his life to see him through to the other side and to make all of this worth it. I mean, we see God's redemption all the time as therapists. Ask yourself right now, as a mental health professional, as a helping professional of any kind, why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you in that field? We have a story. Most of the time, if not all of the time, there is a story that says, I am in this field because of my own pain. This story is my redemption. I was just thinking about this very morning when I was listening to a book about your name. You know, it was a book for women, and it's like, what is your name, and how did you get your name, and what's the significance of your name? And my name personally speaks to something so powerful in my life. My parents came to know God as hippies. They were hippie Jesus freaks. And so they were living wild and trying to find meaning in this life. And then they happened upon a Jesus house, and that's where they met each other. But that's where they met Jesus. They had profound life-changing experiences, and not long after they were married, and I was born 10 months into their marriage. And my mother and father went to the hospital, and it was a Catholic hospital, and they saw the name Monica, Saint Monica. And they decided to name me Monica. And I didn't like my name when I was a kid. It was like, meh. I just thought it was a little weird. I'd rather be named Rachel or Michelle or Becky or whatever. I was born in 1975, and those were the names. They were cool and they were trendy, and I didn't have one of those names. My name was Monica. And I didn't really like it. I was a little embarrassed of it, but as a kid, you just go with it. And it wasn't until years later that I learned what my name meant. And it was really during the time that I felt called to becoming a therapist, a licensed professional, a mental health counselor, that I began to really value my name and the redemptive story of my name. Because my name actually means wise counselor. And I just think you can't make this stuff up. That I didn't choose this field because I was named Monica, but God chose this field for me, and he called me and set me on that path, even in my mother's womb, even in that hospital, even when they decided to name me Saint Monica, or I'm not named Saint Monica, but Monica. So this speaks to the redemptive plan. What is God's plan to bring us into a place of healing, into a place of fullness, into a place of living fulfilled lives, not lives of hopeless despair, but lives of hope? So that's what it means to live in God's redemptive plan, and as a human to connect and collaborate and agree with God in terms of this redemptive plan. But what happens when that's missing? And I'll speak specifically to what it means, what happens when a human doesn't respond to God's redemptive plan, which is really very, very common. It may be more common to not respond to God's redemptive plan than it is to respond. I think what happens is we go the path of least resistance as humans, the path that is not doing hard things, the path that is just embracing pleasure, in embracing hedonism, embracing ease, comfort, laziness, or trauma blocks that keep us from facing pain and difficulty, that keep us from connecting to God as a source of growth. There's a scripture that says, unbelievers' eyes are blinded to the hope that we have in Christ, to those who are perishing, right? They're blinded. But to those of us who are being saved, it's the power of God until salvation. So this redemptive plan that God has for us, when we're in it, when we get it, there's this awareness that's like, why would I choose any other way? But for some reason, people are blinded to the beauty in it and actually choose the difficult path. They choose the cycle of pain. They choose the cycle of addiction. It's a trick. There's nothing good about it. Yet it is oftentimes the path of least resistance that's quote unquote easier, even though it's not more peaceful. Peace and joy are only found in God's redemptive plan. So when we ourselves as humans are following an easier path, a selfish path, a path of our flesh being played out, that's going to impact our ability to be effective as helpers in the world. We're going to be doing things more from the lens of self-protection and um, of laziness and giving up. And we're going to run into a lot of, how do you say, like being exasperated by the difficulties of others, not having capacity, giving out of an empty tank rather than being filled up with God's joy and peace to give out of a fullness. So as therapists, as helping professionals, it doesn't look good. There's not a good projection of how we're going to be able to show up if we're not linking arms with God's redemptive plan. But for those that we're helping, it doesn't look good either. I know I have a lot of clients who come in week after week, or, whether they're coming in weekly or biweekly or monthly, and they're looping around a similar problem because they're not linking up with God's redemptive plan, right? For whatever reason, whether it's trauma blocking them or they just aren't quote unquote ready, like people say, I'm just not ready. I'll be ready someday, but there's almost like a sense of connecting with them week in, week out in terms of where they are, meeting them where they are, and being sad because there's so much on the other side of this. If we just link up with God's redemptive plan, we can actually see the fulfillment, the peace, and the joy start to come into their lives at a different level. So when we don't have an accurate or adaptive response to God's redemptive plan, the only path is destruction. And we really want to be able to apply this in our lives and in the lives of the clients we serve. We want to lead them to it. But we know that nothing is going to change in our lives or in the lives of the clients when we shame someone, we shame ourselves or shame the other person for the blocks that we're experiencing, for the things that are getting in the way of us attuning with God and walking arm in arm with God and his plan. So what we really have to do for ourselves and others is be tender. This is the concept of grace. Grace says you don't have to do anything and you are fully accepted. And grace also says there is another path, and I have to tell you this. You need to know that there's another path, and there is an open door if you would like to choose that path of God's redemptive plan, and that redemptive plan being one of healing, of growth, of maturity, of identity development, and elder level maturity that propagates itself generation to generation. There is a strategic and intentional plan that each of us can follow. And I think, first of all, it's really about understanding that plan yourself and where you might not be connecting with God in that plan. What are the blocks you're experiencing as a helping professional? And getting the help you need. On our team, we say a good therapist has a therapist. And so we have therapists. We have people that we've found who can spur us on, or a spiritual life coach or spiritual director, any of those things to help us see our blind spots. So we really are running the race set before us. And then we can go to our clients and we can inspire them. But first, it's about accepting them right where they are, so that they know they're not alone, so that they know that they are accepted just because they exist. And then we earn the right to speak challenges to the clients, or help them see the areas in their own life where they aren't lining up with and agreeing with and joining God in his redemptive plan for their life. God doesn't do things to us to punish us. These addictions, these compulsions, these traumas aren't punishments from God. And how lonely and how despairing it is to live a life of addiction and trauma reenactments without God's soothing and comforting presence. So it's our job as mental health professionals to come alongside those we work with and really express that love and grace to them in a way that will open up a hopeful perspective about God's redemptive plan. So thanks for tuning in today. If you want to go deeper with the life model and these 30 core concepts, we have a full series of training available at cftinstitute.com. You can log in now and start exploring right away for no cost at all. So we will see you next episode. And remember, healing spreads when counselors live in joy.